Welcome back to the review of the rules for Custer's Last Stand 150-year commemoration. So we were about to talk about the keyword destroyed units. That's basically when the last one of a unit in this is eliminated. So you always would take the Custer's leader disc is the last. So these would get eliminated first, and then the last one would be the one with his personality himself, and then the whole unit is destroyed. There is a possibility, again, with results of double ones, if Custer is fighting and he stops his turn, maybe because he ran out of cohesion points and he can't do a reroll, and he has a pair of ones, that is a situation where let's just use this example. Let's say he had previously lost this, but he gets down here and he ends up getting stuck with a pair of ones. Well, in that case, he loses another cohesion point, and presumably it's not likely that he would not spend it if he had it, but if he does get stuck, then he loses a cohesion point, and if he doesn't have that cohesion point, instead he loses a disc, and his personality is flipped over. So in the case where he was, let's say, in this condition and rolled a pair of ones, well, that sort of snowballs, and then he's going to lose while he's firing. So you have to be careful when you get down to the close to the end of your cohesion track and getting stuck with pairs of threes, pairs of twos, and pair of ones that you can't break up because you don't have any more rerolls that you can afford. Okay, so that's destroyed units. Exhaustion check. Well, anytime that after you've done your firing and moving that you and his cohesion level actually dips below this line. So you don't even have to fire. Let's say you're in a situation where Two Moons is in here, Custer is here, he just moves, doesn't have any fire, but to do the movement, he goes from the 6 to the 5. He would have to do an exhaustion check because he dipped below the line, and you do that by rolling a die, and if you get the same number of your level or less, you're not exhausted. So in this case, he wouldn't be, but if he had rolled a 6, we would put this yellow exhaustion marker on his unit to indicate that. And then next turn, the only action that Custer will be able to do is to do the regroup, which means we add 1, 2, 3. And then in this case, it would be automatically remove this. However, if he was way down here, let's say, and he goes 1, 2, 3, and is still exhausted, but below this line, then we need to see whether or not he still has to make the check. He might not have that removed. Now, in this case he is, but had he rolled a 6, then it would stay exhausted, and the next turn he regroups again and it goes up here. If he isn't exhausted, wherever he is on the track, and he just elects to do the regrouping action, then say he's here and goes, not exhausted, 1, 2, 3, he doesn't have to check. So the only time you're going to check for exhaustion is when you basically expend a point and go below that line. Okay. Fleeing. Fleeing is a special case of moving. There's a number of restrictions, but basically what it amounts to is you're moving away from the enemy after, if you did move, so you fired, then you decide to flee. That typically can happen when, say, half of the 7th Cavalry has been destroyed and maybe only Reno and Benteen are left, and they're over here, and they're going to try and get to the exit space just so they aren't decimated, and it's even worse. They'll still have lost the battle, but it won't be as bad if they can have some survivors. So in the case where you're fleeing, you got to move away from, you can't move into the other, into a space with the enemy, and there's a further restriction. The cavalry cannot move into a space and call it fleeing, if that surrounds the Indian camp. So you could have a weird situation. Let's say Reno pushed forward, it got here, fires and wants to flee. He can't, because this space is adjacent to the village and it's just a restriction. You have to move away from the village, and this is, if you will, considered an equal distance from the village as this space, so not fleeing. So if you don't want to get caught like that, don't push Reno forward. Okay, fords. Talked about fords already. You can only, a cavalry unit has to do it as his first action. If he's going to do it at all, he has to be adjacent to the forward space, and he can only do that once. So after turn one, when Reno can't, in turn one Reno can't, let's say it's the second, so let's say when Reno gets pulled over, he says, I'm going to check for the forward. He flips this one over, it's a dummy. He still does some shooting. Then Benteen could then, as his first action, expend a cohesion point, and then he would find the ford, and now they can cross. Now there is a way that the cavalry can flee across the river without there having been a ford found. But in that case, for each disc that crosses the river, you roll a die, and on a 1 or 2, they drown. So that's just to build a big negative as far as you'll want to find the fords or take another path, like have Reno not cross here, maybe come down here and go this way if they haven't found the ford yet. Okay, so moving, we've already talked about the combined cavalry movement section, charging. Yeah, it's all combined here, but everything that's stated in the moving section has really been addressed previously. Regrouping, we've talked about that too. That's when you add the +3 to your cohesion level. It doesn't cost a cohesion point to do the regrouping. It's just, you're just gonna go and move wherever it was 3. And I went through an example of whether or not if you were already exhausted, whether or not you would have to roll to see if you stayed exhausted. Okay, takes us up to S for shooting. This refers to the action of rolling the dice. Some of the restrictions include enemy units occupying the same space as an attacking unit must be attacked first before engaging any targets that are 1 space away. So that can be important, say in a case where, let's say Yellow Nose is down here having charged Reno. Reno is going to have to fire on Yellow Nose. He can't just continue firing at the village. And let's see, if a cavalry unit moves into the exit space, then they can no longer fire. Now they could have maybe fired back at some Indians and then done the fleeing, or they might just straight up on the first, spend the cohesion point and just move into exit. And so the exit space is really just to sort of keep track of units that didn't perish as opposed to those that died. And then again, they can't do anything from here. They can't come back onto the board. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else new in here. Stacking restrictions. Now what this refers to is you can't have more than 8 of the same color in a space. So because cavalry start with 4 each, until they start taking losses, like if Reno and Benteen joined up in this space, there's already 8. So I couldn't add anything else and make larger than that. This will also be important. Sometimes the Indians will come in with more than 4, so they may have a case where they can't, say a group of 6 charges Reno, and then you have 4 that come on here. Well, they'll have to shoot from a distance. They can't join the first guy because that would exceed the 8. So that's your stacking restrictions. Okay, the term unit refers to all the discs that are under one commander. or 1 leader. And then we talk about the village, which has a couple important things. So in the case, the Indians, they can move through the village. So if Yellownose started here with some disc and then pays the cohesion point, going from here through the village, don't count this space, that would be 1 to get to here. So almost any place they start in, they would be able to charge, unless again there was a restriction because there were already too many Indian units already there. But you can't fire through a space. So if Yellownose were here and couldn't join Indians here, he can't fire through the village, but he could maybe move over to here and then fire from this spot. So these are some of the little finer points that you have to be aware of to play the game correctly. The cavalry cannot move through the village, but they can, well, obviously, they can fire into the village to try and eliminate the orange counters. So, and also they can't shoot through either. So only the Indians can move through the village, neither side can shoot through the village. All right, so the next section is called Cohesion and Exhaustion. And we will start there for the next and probably the last video.